It is said the question is more important than the answer, because in it lies the inner workings of your thought. Alright, so let's answer another question. There's a Telegram channel for Starpath Academy, and there I'm taking questions, and we're at question number 3 out of question 500 that I'm planning to answer. And question number 3 goes, Frank asks, in hyperinflation, what happens to variable interest rates? Is it better to have fixed rate or variable rate loan? In Australia, most home loans are variable for short-term fixed 5 years. It is, however, possible to fix it up to 10 years for 7.5%, which marginally above the current variable rate. So first of all, I'm not a financial advisor. I have no idea what you should do, right? Some may work better for you. I don't know your financial situations and so on and so forth. But there is a part of it, like, here's a thought pattern, right? So here's how I think, and you should not copy this because these are my thought patterns. But what I'm about to say is that when hyperinflation happened in Weimar Germany, essentially the debt was wiped away, because if someone owed someone else 10,000 Weimar German marks, then and 1,000 became a piece of bread, then essentially something that he might have owned for a factory was paid off by 10 pieces of bread. So, and that was true. However, with some mortgages, I have to double check the history, but my memory says that they were recalculated, so based on some new numbers, so they came up with new numbers just so debitors can get back some of their money. But by the whole time the whole process went through, it was pretty much late again, and it was just rampant hyperinflation, in the sense that none of the laws or anything like that could catch it. So that means that usually the fixer it is during hyperinflation, the better, because it gets wiped out faster. If it's variable in hyperinflation, in a possible hyperinflation, that means that they might have a chance to refactor things. Here's the kicker though, with political power and based on what party is ruling and so on, they might change variable or non-variable rates as well, because there's always some type of clause that you don't know about. And just like how there's a ARRRism clause in your insurance, and there's like a civil war clause in your insurance, and there's there are, believe me, there are things in there that you don't know. So when it comes to hyperinflation, I don't think anything will save you, but generally speaking, when you look at history, the fixer it is for the longer term, the better, as long as inflation. Now, my answer was related to extreme points in history, so that's why you should not copy anything that I say. Also, another thing, when it came to the Romanian hyperinflation that I lived through, and I asked my parents and I asked my mother-in-law and father-in-law, and what they told was that usually, well, for us it was different because we were in communism. We didn't have a free market economy, and most of the mortgages were owned by, it was a mix, but basically technically through the government, or through the factory that built it, through the government, or through the factory that you worked for that was owned by the government. So it was a bit weirder, but basically you had the ability, and they gave you the ability, they gave you the ability to pay it off within certain amount of months at the old rate if you still had the cash. The thing is that hyperinflation, although my personal opinion is that Wikipedia is lying when it comes to Romanian inflation during the 90s. However, it was so high that a month or 2 month or 3 month, in some cases 3 months worth of salary was enough to pay off a 25-15 year mortgage, especially if you held some foreign currency. And that's what I want to get into. But before that, here's the deal, what you need to look at. Again, not for financial advice, and talk to Dave Ramsey if you want that or whatever. However, what is the current true rate of inflation? So let's say, actually I should probably Google that because I just don't believe the numbers anymore. But if you take a look at that, right, so let's say what they tell us, right, is that currently in the US is 2.44%, and long-term blah 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 average is 3.28, which is, of course, it's a big fat lie. But basically, if you would calculate inflation based on what you actually consume, so because they're gonna mix in technology and a whole bunch of stuff in there. But if you would only care about food, energy, what you daily buy, what you monthly buy, and so on and so forth, you would most likely end up with an actual higher number of inflation. So that means the inflation, if that inflation rate is actually 9%, 10%, or 12% for the stuff you actually buy, they don't necessarily worry too much about a higher percent on fixed long-term interest rates, because technically you're winning anyway, because the inflation is higher than at the rate you got the money at. So there was a guest on my channel at some point, Jason Hartman, and he's really big into real estate, but he made some really good points that if you are buying rental properties, right, and you are using debt to finance that, and let's say you are, and this was way back when I said like it would be nice for some people to get into real estate, so it was way back when interest rates were about 2%, and inflation, even the known inflation was around 4%, was that, hey, you're actually shorting the dollar with this, because you are getting dollars, you're spending it into something, right, and the amount of dollars you'll need to pay back is going to be worth way less. So it was almost like shorting the dollar. And if you don't know what shorting is, that it basically, you have potatoes, you ask for potatoes, you sell the potatoes into the market, you hold the cash that you just sold it for, then the potatoes go back down. Now you repurchase the potatoes back with less amount of cash, you keep the difference, and you give the potatoes back to the original guy that you borrowed it from. So that's pretty much shorting, right? And that's what you're doing, but you're doing it to the dollar. You're asking for dollars, you're spending the dollars, and then you're going to sell the house, and then you're going to get the cash back, and you're going to give back quote unquote more, right? However, calculated against inflation, you're actually giving back less, because the same amount of money, right, would purchase less eggs, potatoes, and so on and so forth. So look at the true rate of inflation in your country and compare the fixed mortgage to that. How bad is it then, right? And what do you do with the actual property? And do you have problems paying the higher rate? So there's many factors, but in hyperinflation, nothing really matters, to the point where the variable rate is actually worse, because even while they were not in hyperinflation, they're gonna, screw you over at multiple times, even before we get to hyperinflation. With at least the fixed rate, they're not gonna screw you over many times. They would need political effort and all of that good stuff, and who knows what's going to happen to your country, to the point where, okay, let's force the people. Here's the deal though, here's the thing though, is that during hyperinflation there's so much calamity and so much chaos that very little political power do they have to kind of change or piss off the people even more, because at that point you're kind of like teetering on the revolution side, because people have hard time getting food, so it's not like they're gonna care too much. So generally speaking, fixed rate, longer term fixed rate is better, but you need to make sure that you can pay it and it's worthwhile for you, right? And can you refinance that at 2 or 3% if interest rates go back down? Here's the other thing though. So now I want to go back to the answer that I gave, that those who paid off, including my father-in-law, their house with 3 months salary, and got the house clear and free during hyperinflation, they were able to get hold of foreign currency, German marks especially. So the Romanian lei was hyperinflating, but if you had some money in German marks, that was keeping its value, and people were selling off houses because they needed food, so you could use that money, right? Very similarly, and it sounds crazy, but if you look at the price of Bitcoin, like, oh, if you were holding Bitcoin, did you really care about what was the inflation in the last 20 years? Not necessarily if you had some other type of currency. And I'm not saying Bitcoin is going to do well or not well or whatever. However, there are personal historical experiences, right, and personal stories that people who held gold, they were able to pay off their house completely during hyperinflation, right? So these are family members and close to family members. But this was after the fall of communism, and they immediately were able to acquire gold. Okay, so what does that tell you? Well, you should probably go and watch my video on how much gold and silver do you really need, talking from my Romanian experience. So probably I'll link that video, but basically what I'm saying there is that as long as you can pay your mortgage and your taxes and whatever, and you insure against hyperinflation with 10% of that asset put away in gold and silver and precious metals outside of the system, buried somewhere, right in this is a joke, the next part is a joke, but make sure you put it somewhere where you can actually keep it, because there are instances of government seizing gold and silver during these times. But basically, let's just go back to the thing that I've heard from other people, was that, let's say again, if your house is worth 300,000 US dollars, if you have 30,000 US dollars worth of gold and silver, or maybe especially just gold, then you're going to be doing really good during hyperinflation. That's a hard number to achieve, I know, but technically if you guys are renting a lot of apartments, then make sure you cover your behinds with gold and silver, and that's going to be very, very prevalent or whatever in the next coming year. And my guess is that that is why the price is going to be pushed up and up and up and up more and more. But I'm not a guru, I don't know, like we could have a fallback in price. So don't take any investment advice from me. I'm not an investment advisor. But the short answer is, fixed is always better if you can pay it and you can calculate into the future that you can pay it. Again, measure that against the real rate of inflation, if the actual number is that bad compared to that or not. Because if it turns out it's in minus, it's actually a really good deal to buy long-term investment properties with long-term debt, because you're actually shorting the currency that is inflating. And during hyperinflation, usually variable rates do worse, but everybody is doing bad, and you should not do anything that I say. I'm just saying people have used in the past insurance policies through other means of other currency and gold and silver. So I hope that answers your path, not the question, but now you can do more research and talk with your investment advisor, right? All right, that was it. Talk to you next time.